The words landed before Nadia could brace for them. Lost the weight yet? Didn't think so. Her mother said it the way other people commented on the weather, light, almost bored, a champagne flute tilting in her manicured hand, and the three women nearest them at the gold-draped table heard every syllable. Nadia felt the heat climb her neck before her mind even caught up. The whole ballroom kept glittering around her, the chandeliers, the laughter, the soft live music from the corner, all of it carrying on, and she stood at the center of it feeling the floor turn to water under her low gold heels. She had chosen this gown for 3 weeks. She had stood in front of the mirror and turned again, and let herself believe that tonight her mother might look at her and see something worth being proud of. The plum satin caught the light beautifully. She had felt almost brave walking in. Now that bravery drained out of her in front of strangers, and the worst part, the part that hollowed her chest, was how unsurprised she was. This was simply how Veronica spoke to her. It always had been. Veronica had already moved on. That was her gift. To wound and then turn away as if nothing had happened, leaving Nadia holding the broken thing alone. She drifted toward a cluster of important guests, her laughter ringing bright and false across the room, and Nadia watched the emerald green back of her gown disappear into the crowd. Nobody followed Nadia. Nobody touched her arm and asked if she was all right. The people at the nearest table had simply gone back to their drinks, the small cruelty already forgotten by everyone except the woman it had been aimed at. Across the ballroom, a man she had never met had not looked away from her once. Kang Tae-Joon stood by a gilded column with a whisky he had not touched, and he had watched the entire thing. He had seen the mother's mouth move. He had seen the daughter flinch and try to hide it. He had seen the room fail her. Most men in his position would have felt nothing at all, and for years he had prided himself on feeling exactly that. Nothing. But something in the set of that woman's shoulders had reached into a part of him he kept locked and turned a key he had not given anyone permission to touch. His thumb found the brass medallion in his inside pocket without his telling it to. 6 years he had carried that small worn disc. 6 years since a night he never spoke of, a wrecked car on a rain-black road in a country far from here, fire licking at twisted metal and a pair of soft brown hands hauling him out of it before the whole thing went up. He had been bleeding too badly to see her face. He had woken in a hospital days later with a stranger's medallion pressed into his palm and no name to attach to the person who had refused to let him die. He had been looking for her ever since. He could not have explained even to himself why he was so certain. The medallion he carried was hers. He knew it the way you know your own name. The shape of those hands, the warmth of that skin, the particular gravity of a person who had once held his life in her grip and then vanished. The woman her mother had just humiliated in front of 100 strangers was the woman he had been hunting across continents for 6 years, and she had no idea he existed. She needed air. She needed a wall that nobody was watching, a corner of this gilded place where she could let her face do what it wanted to do without an audience. She slipped out of the ballroom and down a hushed corridor, the music fading behind her, the gold carpet swallowing the sound of her heels. Her chest was tight and her eyes burned, and she hated that a woman of 28 could still be reduced to a scolded child by a single sentence from her mother. She reached the quiet alcove and pressed her back to the cool wall and finally let herself breathe. For a moment she let one tear fall, just one, and then she wiped it away with the side of her thumb because she refused to ruin the makeup she had done so carefully. The city glittered beyond the tall window, cold and indifferent and beautiful. She told herself the thing she always told herself, that she would smile, that she would go back in, that she would survive this the way she had survived every gala before it. She did not hear the footsteps behind her until a low voice spoke, and it was a voice she had never heard before in her life. "You should not let anyone make you that small," he said. Nadia turned, startled, and found a man she did not know standing a careful distance away, his hands loose at his sides, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that should have frightened her and somehow did not. He was beautiful in a severe, dangerous way, the kind of man the whole room seemed to bend quietly around. She did not know that every important person at that gala was afraid of him. She only knew that he had watched her be humiliated, and that instead of pity, his face held something that looked almost like recognition. "Who are you?" she asked, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. He did not answer the question. Instead, he said something that stopped the breath in her throat. He said that a woman who could carry herself through a room that cruel and still hold her head the way she did was not someone to be pitied, she was someone to be feared, and that her mother was a fool who would understand that far too late. No one had ever spoken about her like that, not once in 28 years. She did not know whether to run from him or toward him. She did not trust kindness. She had learned a long time ago that kindness, in the mouths of people who wanted something, was the prettiest trap there was. So she stepped back and let the wariness show on her face, because she would rather a stranger think her cold than soft. "You don't know me," she said, "and you don't know my mother, so you don't get to have an opinion about either of us." He inclined his head, accepting it, and the strange thing was that he did not look offended. He looked, if anything, like she had just confirmed something he already believed about her. What neither of them saw was the woman at the end of the corridor. Seo Hana had been watching Kang Tae-Joon all evening, the way she always watched him, with the patient certainty of someone who believed a thing was already hers. She had been told since she was young that he would be her husband one day, that two old houses had decided it between them before either of them had a say. And now she stood in the shadows and watched him fold his whole attention around a woman she did not recognize, and something cold and sharp turned over in her chest. "Come back inside with me," he said. Not as a question. He held out his hand, palm open, and waited, and there was no force in it, only an offer she was free to refuse. Nadia stared at that open hand. Every instinct she had built over a lifetime told her to walk away, to go home, to lick her wounds in private the way she always did. But there was something in the steadiness of him, something that said he would not flinch and he would not let go. And after 28 years of being let go of, that steadiness undid her more than any sweet word could have. She put her hand in his. She would spend a long time afterward trying to understand why, and the only honest answer she would ever find was that he made her feel chosen in a building full of people who had spent the whole night choosing everyone but her. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and a current went up her arm and settled somewhere behind her ribs. He did not pull her. He simply held on and turned and walked her back toward the light of the ballroom as if she were the most important person there. They walked back in together, and the room noticed. It noticed the way rooms always notice when Kang Tae-Joon does something, because Kang Tae-Joon did not touch people, did not escort people, did not look at anyone the way he was looking at the woman beside him. Conversations stumbled, heads turned, a glass paused halfway to a painted mouth. And Nadia, who 20 minutes earlier had wanted the floor to swallow her, walked through the center of all those staring faces with a dangerous stranger's hand wrapped warm around her own, and for the first time in her life she did not shrink. Veronica saw them before they reached her. Her champagne stopped halfway to her lips. She knew exactly who the man was, everyone in that room knew, and she watched him walk her humiliated daughter through the gala like a queen and felt the ground shift beneath her certainties. For a single unguarded second, something crossed her face that was not pride and was not love. It was calculation. The daughter she had spent years diminishing was suddenly standing next to the most powerful man in the country, and Veronica Sefu was already, behind those hard eyes, beginning to count what that might be worth. He stopped in front of Veronica and let the silence stretch until it was unbearable. Then he said, very quietly, so that only the nearest few could hear, that he had watched her humiliate the most remarkable woman in the room, and that he wondered whether she had any idea what she had been given and thrown away. Veronica opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The woman who always had the last word, who had built her whole life on the power of her own sharp tongue, stood mute in front of a man who had not raised his voice once. Nadia stood between the two of them and felt something she had no name for. Her whole life, her mother had been the largest force in any room, a weather system Nadia had learned to survive, and now a stranger had walked in and made that weather small with a few soft sentences. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt unmoored, as though a wall she had leaned against her whole life had just been revealed to be made of paper. Her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, somewhere around 110 beats a minute, she thought wildly, and almost laughed at herself for counting. If you are still here, still leaning in, watching this woman who was torn down in front of a room full of people who were supposed to love her, finally stand up straight, then do one quiet thing. Tap that subscribe button, not because anyone is shouting at you to, but because it tells this channel that the stories we pour everything into are reaching the people they were made for. Every subscriber is the reason the next one gets made. So if Nadia's story already has its hook in you, subscribe and stay close, because what happens next is going to break something open. He walked her out himself. He did not ask whether she wanted to leave the gala, he simply read it off her, the exhaustion under the new steadiness. and a black car was at the curb before she had finished deciding she wanted to go. Rain was falling soft and silver through the hotel lights. He opened the door for her, and Nadia paused on the wet pavement and looked at this man she had known for less than an hour and understood that getting into that car would change the shape of her entire life. She got in anyway. They did not speak for the first few minutes. The city slid past in ribbons of wet light, and Nadia watched it and felt the strange peace of sitting beside someone who did not require her to perform. When he finally spoke, he did not ask the things she expected. He did not ask about her mother or her work or what a woman like her was doing at a gala like that. He asked whether she had eaten anything all night, and when she admitted she had not, something in his jaw tightened as though her hunger were a personal offense to him. Nadia Sefu, she told him when he asked her name, and she watched something move across his face that she did not understand. For a moment he looked almost winded, as though the two soft syllables of her name had reached somewhere deep and pressed on an old bruise. Then it was gone, smoothed back under his control, and he simply repeated it once, quietly, Nadia, as if learning the shape of it. She had no way of knowing he had spent 6 years not knowing the name of the woman who had saved his life. She only knew he said it like it mattered. His phone buzzed against his thigh. He glanced at it, and the warmth that had been in him a moment before cooled by several degrees. One of his men, a man who answered every call within 2 rings, was not answering. He had been stationed at the gala that night, and he had gone quiet, and in Kang Tae-Joon's world a man going quiet was never nothing. He did not let it show, or thought he did not. But Nadia had spent her life reading the faces of people who hid things, and she saw the shadow cross his. Back at the hotel, in a cold concrete stairwell that the gala's guests never saw, the man who had stopped answering his phone lay at the bottom of a flight of stairs. He had not fallen. Men like him did not simply fall. Somebody had made sure of him in the few minutes between the chandeliers and the dark, and somebody had been careful, and somebody had wanted it to look like an accident to anyone who did not look closely. Kang Tae-Joon was always going to look closely. That was the problem the killer had not solved. When his people reached the body, they found something in the dead man's pocket that turned Kang Tae-Joon to stone when they sent it to him. A photograph, not of an enemy, not of a target he understood, a photograph of Nadia, taken weeks earlier, on an ordinary street, in ordinary clothes, by a long lens she had never known was pointed at her. Someone had been watching her for a long time before tonight. Someone had been building toward this before he had ever laid eyes on her. And whoever it was had just killed to keep their secret. He looked at her across the dim interior of the car, this woman who had no idea that a man had died tonight with her face in his pocket, and he made a decision he would not tell her about for a long time. He would not frighten her, not yet, not while she was still soft and stunned from the kindness of being chosen. He would carry the danger himself, quietly, the way he carried everything. He would find out who had been watching her. And whoever it was would learn what it cost to point a lens at something Kang Tae-Joon had decided to protect. The debt came due 3 days later, and it pulled them out of the country. Kang Tae-Joon told her only that an old matter between his world and her family had to be settled abroad, that she was safer at his side than anywhere he could leave her, and that he would explain what he could when he could. Nadia should have asked more. A wiser woman would have. But 3 days of his quiet attention had done something to the wall she lived behind, and she boarded the jet at dawn with her heart already further gone than her caution wanted to admit. The estate rose out of the hills like something from a dream she had not known she carried. Rows of vines ran gold to the horizon. A pale stone manor sat in the late light, with ivy climbing its arched windows, and for a few minutes, stepping out of the car onto warm gravel with the smell of sun and crushed leaves in the air, Nadia let herself forget that they had come here because of blood and debt. It was the most beautiful place she had ever stood. She did not yet know it was a trap, dressed as a truce. Something happened to Nadia at that vineyard in the first golden evening. She let her hair down, loose curls instead of the careful halo she armored herself with, and she put on a soft terracotta dress that moved with the wind instead of the structured gowns she chose to be acceptable in, and she walked the rows of vines and felt, maybe for the first time in her adult life, that she was allowed to simply take up space in a beautiful place. Tae-Joon watched her from the terrace and did not breathe for a moment. He had spent his whole adult life keeping his face still. It was a skill that had kept him alive, and yet standing on that terrace watching a woman walk through the vines with her hair down and her shoulders finally loose, he felt the stillness slip, felt his chest do something it had not done in years. Master Yoon had taught him that a man in his position does not get to want things for himself, that wanting is a door enemies walk through. He had believed it for a decade. He looked at Nadia and felt the whole careful structure of that belief begin to crack. That night, there was a dinner. These things were always dressed as hospitality, Tae-Joon had told her, a long table and good wine, and old enemies smiling at each other across the candlelight, while underneath the table every hand stayed close to a blade. She wore deep emerald that evening, and she sat at his right hand, and she watched powerful strangers raise their glasses to a peace that none of them meant. She did not know most of the faces, but two of them she would come to know far too well before the night was over. Under the table, where no one could see, his hand found hers and held it. It was a small thing. It was everything. In a room full of people who would have used any softness against him, he reached for her anyway, and Nadia sat very straight and held his hand back and felt, against all the warnings in her head, safe. That was the cruelty of what came next. They let her feel safe first. A man at the head of the table rose to make a toast and lifted his glass, and the whole table lifted theirs. To old debts settled and new friendships begun, the man said, and a dozen glasses rose, and the candlelight caught the dark wine like blood. Nadia lifted hers. Tae-Joon lifted his, and the host, an old enemy of Tae-Joon's house, drank deep with a smile that did not reach his eyes. For one held breath, the whole table seemed at peace. Then the glass slipped from the host's hand and shattered on the stone floor, and his smile twisted into something terrible, and his hands went to his own throat. The hall erupted. The host went down clawing at his collar, his face gone a terrible color, and a glass that had held wine meant for that end of the table rolled across the stone, and somewhere a woman screamed, "Poison!" Everyone in that room knew it at once because everyone in that room had grown up close to it. Chairs crashed backward, hands went to hidden weapons, and in the middle of the chaos, Kang Tae-Joon did only one thing. He turned his back on the dying man and put his body between Nadia and the entire room. He pulled her against him and got her out of that hall through a side door while men shouted behind them, and his arm around her was iron, and his heartbeat under her ear was steady, and Nadia understood with sudden clarity that this man would let the entire room burn before he let a single ember touch her. The wine had been meant for that end of the table, the end where the host sat, the end where, an hour earlier, the seating had nearly placed Tae-Joon instead. Someone had tried to kill him tonight, and had killed the wrong man, and was still in this house. He took her out to the terrace, away from the noise, into the cool moonlit air, and only when they were alone did she feel him let down half a degree of his guard. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against his chest to stop them, and felt his heart going harder than his calm face would ever admit. They stood like that in the silver dark with the vines breathing below them, two people who had just watched a man die, holding on to each other because there was nothing else solid left to hold. His hand came up and cradled the side of her face, his thumb against her cheekbone, and he looked at her like a man looking at the one thing he was not allowed to have. She felt his breath against her lips. She felt the whole careful distance he had kept collapsing in the space of a single inch. He whispered her name once, Nadia, ragged, like a confession, and she rose toward him, and the kiss was a heartbeat away from happening when he stopped. He stopped himself. And the pain of that, of watching him choose duty over the thing they both wanted, was worse than if he had never touched her at all. "I cannot," he said, and the words came out of him like they were being torn loose. Not because he did not want her. He made that brutally clear, his voice low and shaking, because there were things about his life she did not know. Promises made over him before he was old enough to refuse them, and to pull her into the center of his world without telling her the truth would be a kind of theft. She did not understand. She only heard a man she was falling for telling her no, and the old voice in her, the one her mother had built, whispered that of course he could not want her. Of course, look at her. She walked to the edge of the terrace alone and gripped the cold stone and made herself breathe. A man had died at dinner. A man she was falling for had just pulled away. And somewhere in the beautiful house behind her, whoever had poured that poison was still moving. If you are still watching, still holding on through all of this, drop one word in the comments that names exactly what you are feeling right now. One word, whatever is sitting heaviest. And while you are there, tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because something tells me people are watching this one at all hours, in all kinds of places, and I want to know who is in this room with us tonight. She was not alone for long. A voice spoke behind her, smooth and cold, and Nadia turned to find a beautiful Korean woman she had noticed at the dinner watching her with open contempt. Seo Hana did not bother with pretense. She told Nadia exactly who she was. The woman Kang Tae-Joon was promised to. The marriage sealed by his own master years ago. 2 houses bound by blood to keep a war from starting. She said it the way you drop a stone down a well, watching the other person's face for the splash. It landed exactly where Seo Hana aimed it. Nadia stood there in the moonlight and felt the beautiful evening turn to ash. So this was the thing he could not tell her. This was the duty he had chosen over the kiss. Not that he did not want her, but that he was already promised, already bound. And she was the foolish woman who had let herself be walked through a ballroom and flown across the world and made to feel chosen by a man who belonged to someone else. The shame was an old, familiar coat. She put it on. While Nadia stood breaking on the terrace, the one person who had loved her plainly his whole life was arriving at the manor in a travel-creased jacket, having chased her across the world on nothing but a bad feeling. Daniel Okonkwo had loved Nadia since long before any Mafia boss took her hand, quietly, hopelessly, the way you love someone who has never once looked at you that way. He had heard she had flown off with a dangerous man, and he had not been able to sit still. He came to protect her. He had no idea what he was about to find. Looking for Nadia, Daniel went the wrong way down a corridor and found a study with the door ajar and a lamp still on. On the desk lay an open ledger, and a cabinet had been forced, and the papers spread under the green light told a story he did not want to read. Names, sums, a transaction, and a signature at the bottom he knew as well as his own because he had seen it 100 times on letters and cards over the years. The signature was Malik's. Nadia's own brother had sold something here, something that was never his to sell. "You should not have come in here," Malik said from the doorway, and his easy, charming smile was gone, replaced by something cold that Daniel had never seen on him before. Nadia's brother stepped into the lamplight, and every smooth thing about him had turned to flint. Daniel had grown up around this family. He had always thought Malik was harmless, ambitious maybe, vain certainly, but harmless. He understood now, looking at the man blocking the only door, that he had been wrong about that for years, and that he had just walked into the most dangerous room in the house. "Walk away," Malik told him, "and forget what you saw, and you can still get on a plane home tonight with all your teeth." Daniel did not move. He had spent his whole life being the gentle one, the steady one, the man who let louder people take the room. But he was standing in a study that proved Nadia's own brother had sold her into something, and gentleness was suddenly the furthest thing from him. "Tell me what you did to her," he said, and his voice was very quiet, and Malik's hand stopped halfway into his jacket. Nadia found Tae-Joon and did not let him speak first. "You are promised to her," she said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "You walked me through that ballroom and let me feel like the only woman alive, and you were already someone else's." He did not deny it. He told her the oath was real, sworn over him by Master Yoon before he was old enough to refuse. 2 houses bound to keep a war from burning. But he also told her, low and fierce, that he had never once felt for Seo Hana what he felt standing in front of her right now, and that this was the truth that could get them both killed. Before she could answer him, his phone lit again, and whatever the voice on the other end said drained the color from the room in his face. They had to leave. Now. The poisoning had been only the opening move, and the people behind it knew exactly where Nadia was, and staying in that beautiful house one more hour was no longer survivable. He gripped her hand, the same way he had in the ballroom a lifetime ago, and this time there was no crowd to perform for, only the cold certainty that the trap they had walked into was closing. Daniel got out of that study. How he got past Malik, he would tell her later, his jacket torn and a bruise rising on his cheek. But he got out, and he ran through the house with one thought hammering in him. He had to reach Nadia before she got on a plane, not knowing what he knew. Her brother had sold her. The poisoning, the watching, the whole golden trap of this place. Malik's signature was under all of it. He dialed her over and over as he ran. She did not pick up. She was already in a car, racing for the airport, her hand in the hand of a man she was no longer sure she could trust. The airport swallowed them in noise and light and 1,000 strangers. Tae-Joon moved her through it fast, his eyes never still, one hand at the small of her back, scanning the crowd for the threat he knew was somewhere in it. 2 flights waited at the far end of the terminal. One would take her home, away from him, back to the safe small life she had been living before he took her hand. The other would take her deeper into his world, and into whatever was hunting them both. He had told her it was her choice. He had not told her that someone had already made it for her long ago. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Daniel's name, again, the 11th time, a wall of missed calls she had been too overwhelmed to answer. She stopped in the middle of the concourse and finally lifted it to her ear, and Daniel's voice poured out of it fast and frightened, telling her to listen. Just listen, that her brother had done something, that none of this was chance, that she had to get away from all of it right now. and as the words reached her, a figure stepped out of the crowd ahead, and Nadia's whole body went cold because she knew that face. The man walking toward her through the crowd was her father, Nadia Sefu, 6 years dead. She had stood at his funeral. She had wept over a closed casket, had watched her mother wear black, had spent 6 years learning to live in a world that no longer had him in it. And here he was, walking through an airport with the calm of a man who had never been gone at all, his eyes finding hers across the moving crowd, his mouth shaping her name as though he had said it yesterday. "Nadia," he said. The phone slipped from her hand. Everything she thought she knew turned over in a single second. If her father was alive, then her grief had been a lie. If her father was alive, then her mother had stood at that grave and wept, knowing the casket was empty. And the words Daniel had screamed into the phone, that none of this was chance, that someone had built it, suddenly had a face. Her father had not simply come back from the dead. He had been somewhere all this time, doing something, and the calm in his eyes as he crossed that terminal told her he was not surprised to find her here at all. He had expected it. He had arranged it. But the shock on Nadia's face was nothing next to what moved across Tae-Joon's. Because Tae-Joon knew this man too, not as Nadia's dead father, as the silent power that had stood above even Master Yoon all these years, the hidden hand that Tae-Joon had answered to without ever being shown its face, the architect of debts and oaths that had ruled his entire adult life. The man who had arranged Tae-Joon's world was Nadia's father, and in one sickening rush, Tae-Joon understood that the night 6 years ago, the wreck, the rescue, even this, all of it, had been built by the same hand. His hand closed around the medallion in his pocket, the one he had carried for 6 years, the one a pair of soft brown hands had pressed into his palm on a burning road. He had spent all that time believing the woman who saved his life had been a stranger fate had sent. He understood now that fate had a name, and the name was Nadia Sefu, and the wreck that had bound Tae-Joon's life to the Sefu family by a debt of blood had perhaps never been an accident at all. The girl who pulled him from the fire that night had been a frightened 22-year-old. She had been Nadia. Amika stopped a few feet away and looked at the two of them, at his daughter and the man he had spent 6 years shaping into her protector, and something almost like satisfaction crossed his weathered face. "I needed you to find each other," he said, his voice low and certain, as though he were explaining something reasonable. "Everything I did, every debt, every door, all of it was to put him between you and what is coming. You were never safe, Nadia. You have never once been safe. I had to build you a wall while you slept." His eyes softened on her, and then they moved past her, sharpening to something over her shoulder. Whatever Amika saw over her shoulder, he reacted to it the way only a man who had spent his life around danger could. His face changed, his hand shot out toward her, and Tae-Joon, reading the same wrongness in the crowd a half-second behind, was already moving, already turning, already throwing himself toward the space between Nadia and the thing coming for her. The crowd flowed on, oblivious. A child laughed somewhere. An announcement chimed overhead, and in the middle of all that ordinary noise, in the half-second before any of them could close the distance, a single sharp crack split the air. He got there first. Of course he did. He had spent 6 years and a whole rebuilt life getting between Nadia Sefu and harm, and his body knew how to do it before his mind even finished the thought. The impact spun him. Nadia heard the sound and felt him jerk against her and did not understand, for one merciful second, what had happened. Then his weight came down into her arms, heavier than a person should be, and her hands where they caught him came away dark and wet, and the merciful second ended. She went down to the floor with him because her legs would not hold them both. She gathered him into her lap, the way you gather something you cannot bear to lose, and his blood was warm and terrible against her palms, and his eyes, those cool eyes that had looked at her across a ballroom and decided she was worth crossing a room for, found her face and stayed there. His mouth moved. Her name. Just her name. The way he had said it in the car. The way he had said it on the terrace, like it was the only word he had left, and he was spending it on her. With the last of his strength, he pressed something into her hand and closed her fingers over it. She looked down. A small brass medallion, worn smooth at the edges, warm from being carried against a heart for years. She did not understand it. She had never seen it before, but he was looking at her as though it explained everything, as though it were the answer to a question she had not known she was the center of. And his lips shaped 3 more words she could not hear over the screaming, and his hand, holding hers around the brass, began to go slack. And through all of it, while strangers fled and her whole world bled out in her arms, her father did not run. He stood over the two of them, calm in the chaos, looking down at his daughter holding the dying man he had spent 6 years placing at her side. The panic broke around him like water around a stone. He was not afraid. He had known this might happen. He had perhaps even planned for it. And when he finally spoke, into the screaming and the blood and the ruin of everything Nadia thought was true, he said her name again, gently, the way a father says it, the way a man says it who never left at all. Nadia raised her eyes from the man dying in her arms to the father who had buried himself alive to move her through a game like a piece on a board, and something in her that had spent 28 years bowing finally, quietly, stood up. The medallion bit into her closed fist. The woman who had walked into a ballroom begging for a scrap of approval was gone. In her place, kneeling in blood under the cold airport light, was someone her father had not planned for, someone Seo Hana had not counted on, someone her mother would not recognize. She looked up at Nadia Sefu, and for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of anyone in the room. Her father reached down a hand to her, the same gesture, she would realize later, that had started all of this, a powerful person offering a hand to a woman on the floor. And Nadia looked at that hand and looked at the man bleeding in her arms and understood that whatever she did next would decide everything. She did not know yet if Tae-Joon would live. She did not know what her father truly wanted. She only knew that the medallion in her fist was the first true thing in a design built entirely of lies, and that the answer to everything was somewhere inside it. If you need to know what she does next, say it. Comment part 2 and say it loud.